Sustainable Development Policy Institute. The topic for today is e-commerce policy and SME preparedness in Pakistan. I will be your moderator for the day. My name is Ahad Nazir, and I'm heading at the Center for Private Sector Engagement at STPI. Some basic housekeeping rules that I like to point out at the start, both for our panelists as well as for the attendees that are joining us. The honorable panelist speakers may like to keep their microphones on mute when they're not speaking to avoid distortions. The honorable speakers may like to put their cameras on when they're speaking, if their internet bandwidth allows so. The attendees may like to put their questions in the Q&A box that we have. I think you'll find it in the middle bottom of the screen. I will be keeping the time, so I will be intervening in between interventions by our honorable speakers, just for the sake of timekeeping, so that everyone gets a good chance to speak on this very important topic. The speakers may feel free to speak bilingually, and of course the YouTube video recording of this particular meeting will have subtitles for our foreign participants that are joining. With of course your permission, we will be recording this meeting, and we will also be posting it on YouTube in the coming days. And this meeting is also going live on our website as well as on Facebook. So let me just start off by introducing the august panel we have today, and of course we will be soon joined by Dr. Taqir Shah, who is the National Project Coordinator for the ITC Remit program, which is being implemented in Pakistan through FCDO and ITC. We are joined by Ms. Aisha Humaira Moriani. She is representing the Ministry of Commerce. She's a senior joint secretary there, and she has 25 years of experience working on public policy, and she's a graduate of development management from London School of Economics. We are also joined by Mr. Shahriyar Tahir from SMEDA. He's the head of external affairs there. He's 21 years of experience in public and development sector, especially with regards to SME development. We are joined by Dr. Ghulam Samad, who is a senior research officer at the Carrick Institute. He is a professional research economist, having experience of working with government as well as the development agencies. Particularly, we would like to hear about his research on creative enterprises with late Rauf Khalid Saab and Dr. Waqar Ahmed, that has some relevance with the subject. We are joined by Mr. Asfandyar Farooq, who is the member of National E-Commerce Council and the Senior Vice President of Chain Store Association of Pakistan. He's the Managing Director of Urban Brands, and he's representing the private sector in this meeting. From SDPI, we will be joined by Mr. Ahmed Khabar, who will be giving a small agenda setting presentation at the start as well. He's a research associate at SDPI and has had a good experience of working on several topics of public policy. And last but not the least, Dr. Waqar Ahmed, Joint Executive Director, SDPI, is part of the panel as well. He's an experienced development practitioner and a macroeconomist who has served in various capacities in the government as well as in the development sector. His areas of focus are trade and taxation, but he has worked on other aspects as well. So just a brief thought at the start, if I may. The digitization of businesses have been, of course, a gradual process, but it was catalyzed by COVID-19, and we actually saw a good shift even in the policy making towards digitization of businesses. But if I may just add here that the e-commerce policy that came out in 2019, and of course, we'd like to hear from Ms. Aisha, because she was the focal person, the pivot in that policy development regarding the policy. So Pakistan has actually come a long way on its towards creating this e-commerce transition, as I will like to call it. And anecdotally, we can see a lot of electronic trades happening. For instance, a lot of people are selling goods and services via Instagram and Facebook, which are not conventional e-commerce platforms, but still we see a lot of this happening over social media. And we'd like to hear more from Ahmed Khabar and the panelist in this regard. So without further ado, I will start the discussion. We are joined by Dr. Taqir Shah, as I previously introduced him. He is the National Project Coordinator for ITC Remit program. Sir, over to you for the opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum and very good morning, everyone. I would particularly like to thank Madam Aisha Moriani, the focal person for Ministry of Commerce and Government of Pakistan, for e-commerce and e-commerce policy. I must acknowledge her untiring efforts for conceiving and helping put this very important policy and issue on the agenda of the government. She has been steering this for the last couple of years. And thank you to all the other participants for joining us to engage in a discussion on this very important issue. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the ITC, I once again welcome you. As you know, International Trade Center Geneva is a key agency of the UN, which supports internationalization of SMEs. It has a couple of programs running in Pakistan. Pakistan has been a key and a driving member of International Trade Center Geneva. ITC enables and believes in enabling SMEs in developing transition economies to become more competitive and connect to international markets. And this is what brings us to Pakistan. We have been endeavoring to foster an inclusive and sustainable economic development of the developing countries and help them achieve the SDGs. Through this program, which is called Remit, which has organized today's webinar, which is Revenue Mobilization, Investment and Trade. It's a program supported by FCDO, the British government. And the key focus is development of SMEs, particularly women and youth-owned SMEs in Pakistan, and help them become global trade players. Remit is a new initiative, and in partnership with the Ministry of Commerce, we are striving to enable the SMEs in Pakistan to effectively engage in global international markets. As I said, that it's a UK-funded program, and we are planning to work till 2024, and with different institutions and organs of the Government of Pakistan, like TDAP, like the Pakistan Institute of Trade and Development, FPR, and primarily the Ministry of Commerce. So when this idea came up about e-commerce preparedness and SMEs, it was naturally of a great interest to ITC and Remit, because this is a key focus for us. Ladies and gentlemen, 21st century global trade or economy, in my view, had seen two very far-reaching developments. One was the advances in ICT, which is information, communication and technology. And second was when the production process got disaggregated and the era of global value chains came in. So for SMEs, these two developments, the development of information technology and the production process becoming a global multi-agency, multi-country process, developing a global value chains. I think these are the two key areas which our SMEs or any SME has to really leverage if they want to become global. Globally, SMEs are leading providers of employment, as you all know. And we see that it's estimated that 20% of new SMEs go out of business after the first year. And over 50% eventually wind up after 5 years. In Pakistan, there are approximately 3.2 million plus SMEs. They account for 90% of all enterprises in Pakistan. SMEs in Pakistan employ more than 70% of the national labor force, which is almost 45 to 50 million people. And main sectors in which SMEs are involved almost includes everything: manufacturing, wholesale and retail services, social and community services, livestock, agriculture, transport, storage, communications. But we see that export of Pakistani SMEs only account for about 25% of our total export. So this is the real challenge, that how to really graduate our SMEs from domestic economic players to becoming a global player. We in Remit and ITC believe that cross-border e-commerce is a unique opportunity for SMEs in countries and regions that have traditionally found it difficult to reach regional or international markets and connect with potential buyers beyond their borders. And in our view, SME development is directly linked with development of cross-border e-commerce. And we were really happy to see that of a number of key areas that the national policy has identified, SMEs and women-owned SMEs are a key priority, which I'm sure Madam Humaira will share with us in more detail. We believe that e-commerce is the biggest force for SMEs. 90% of most countries' industries are SMEs. And there is no better policy than to provide these SMEs the connectivity and platform to grow by connecting them globally. Their products can reach the globe if they can come online. And in our view, e-commerce and SMEs have to grow hand in hand. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, internet more than anything else will be defining the 21st century business environment. Internet revolution now contributes more than double digit to the global GDP, and this has become more obvious and manifest in the post-COVID world. The development of mobile broadband holds the promises of bringing millions or billions of more people online, thus narrowing the digital, economic, physical, and educational divide. The Internet of Things, or some people say Internet of Everything, has the potential of contributing 11 trillion to global GDP by year 2025. Internet-related consumption and expenditure has already surpassed the size of the global agriculture and energy sectors. This is the type of data that prompted Jack Ma, the e-commerce guru, to say that e-commerce is no longer a dessert. It has become the main course. Ladies and gentlemen, we, as you know, are in the era where people no longer go online. They are 24/7 online. The destiny of our society is digital. In our view, internet is a global good, a global common. But the challenge is, how can SMEs, and particularly those in the developing world, benefit from this global good, that is internet, and its role in trade? Presently, more than 3 billion people in the world are what we call the internet generation. For them, e-commerce is a lifestyle and a great opportunity. Data tells us that we have 3 times more connected devices than people on the planet right now. In the pre-digital age, only large corporations had the economies of scale to operate on a global level. Today, any entrepreneur with a laptop and a big idea can access the global markets. But only a small proportion of this is happening in developing world. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an undeniable fact that trading internationally is often much more costly and difficult for SMEs. The smaller the business, the bigger and more difficult the barriers they face. In our view, a truly inclusive e-commerce market is the one where anyone can sell to anyone, anywhere, anytime. We have seen, and this is amply supported by WTO research and their global report, which came on SMEs and global businesses, that SMEs are breaking the iron law of international trade, that exports was possible only for large corporations. Today, while less than 5% of the big companies export, the WTO World Trade Report cites that 97% of technology and internet-enabled SMEs export. So this is the key factor, that when SMEs become technology-enabled and internet-enabled, they immediately become global players. It is also supported by Next Trade Group in their research that e-commerce, they did a survey of 30,000 developing country companies, and it revealed that half of the small online sellers export, as opposed to only 20% of offline sellers. And more than 60% of online sellers export to two or more markets. So e-commerce or digital economy is a great opportunity for achieving the much desired diversity in our trading markets. So ladies and gentlemen, we have to support these SMEs in fully integrating into global trade. But there are challenges. I draw your attention to UNCTAD e-commerce readiness index score, which for the developed world is 87. For Africa, it is 30. For developing Asia, it is 37. For Pakistan, it is 33 or 34. I believe this has seeds of deepening the digital divide and institutionalizing it if due attention is not given to this aspect. This index looks at 4 dimensions. Account ownership, I mean the bank account ownership. It could be a card, it could be a digital account. Internet penetration, secure servers per million population, and postal service reliability. On this index, when we look at our economy, we have big challenges, but we are happy that the e-commerce policy has taken cognizance of these challenges, and there are working groups and key sections in the policy which deal with all these 4 dimensions. But still, UNCTAD index clearly shows that the capacity and ability to engage successfully in e-commerce varied significantly among countries. All indices brought out by different organizations on ICT have one common message. That is, we are digitally multi-speed planet. And this has huge challenges for SMEs and SMEs, especially in Pakistan and the developing world. Ladies and gentlemen, to end, I must say that we have to accept that future is digital, but it has to be a common future and not a divided future like past, where the big companies and big players benefited and we were just left by the wayside. So we believe that by preparing SMEs and helping them, we'll make this future a very inclusive, organized, and transparent. The gains of digital revolution have not been shared widely yet. The digital technologies can be transformational by promoting inclusion, efficiency, and innovation. But if digital economy is not accessible to
Yes, it is. Thank you.
So I will be briefly presenting on e-commerce policy and the state of SME preparedness in the country. Some of the work that informs this presentation comes from the research that we did with the Planning Commission with regards to the subgroup on industry and enterprise. And there's another working group that is in the process of being set up at the Planning Commission specifically for e-commerce as well, and which would be notified in the coming weeks. So a quick look at the outline of the presentation. I'll be looking at the e-commerce landscape in the country, some challenges for SMEs to both exploit the available opportunities and also to connect themselves with the e-commerce landscape in the country. A quick look at the legislative and policy framework, and then how we can collectively all move forward from where we stand right now. In terms of the payment systems in the country, there's a comparison of 2 quarters of the year. If I can bring your focus to the last column on the percentage change. In e-banking, you have a positive 4% uptake in volume and 5% in terms of value, and paper-based shows a decrease in 4% decrease and 1% increase in value. A payment system infrastructure, you see a steady and gradual increase in all 3 variables across 5 quarters. Internet banking users, mobile phone banking users, and registered e-commerce merchants with the banks continue to rise. Of course, as Dr. Tokir has identified, that there is potential which is being harnessed in the country. Digital market outlook, of course, within the e-commerce sphere, we see the fashion and the apparel industry continuing to lead in terms of sales and revenue, but there are other products and services that are now coming in and getting more and more traction. SMEs, as already mentioned, contribute significantly to the economy of the country, with 40% to GDP and 25% in export earnings. If we look at SME financing, which continues to be a major hindrance and bottleneck for SMEs as a whole, and also for e-commerce, it stood at about 444 billion rupees, which corresponds to about 6.6% of total private sector credit from banks, which is a minuscule amount. Other issues are like the lack of digital skills. Of course, we see there's a huge uptick in social media e-marketing, but when you talk about setting up specific websites and connecting them with e-payment platforms, that remains a question mark. There's a situation, there's a fix of know-how of digital platforms. We require orientation on that. The fee structure, for example, if you have these courier services involved, because 90% of such SMEs involved in e-commerce do rely on cash on delivery, you have a week to a 2-week period of time where cash flow can move about. So that there are questions on cash flow. Relevant information of different schemes is not available within a specific place. They have to go around on so many different legislations and different entities of the government to get the required information. Of course, there have been significant strides in internet connectivity and infrastructure in the country. However, Pakistan continues to be have significant reliance on cash as a payment method. The ranking of Pakistan on Global Innovation Index with regards to access to ICT and the use of ICT in the country can, of course, improve itself a lot. There's quite ground that we still need to cover. With regards to imports on digital products, imports of digital products, there's a high tax. There are again concerns of SMEs on data security, private protection bill. Of course, we have the draft over there that's still being modified, but these are some of the situations that the SMEs find themselves are not able to connect to the large potential of e-commerce in the country. Some of the legislation and institutional mechanisms that are in place, for example, the State Bank of Pakistan, of course, regulates the banking sector. the SME Asan Finance, of course, a major concern is access to finance. So now there's a scheme called Asan Finance that can allow a finance with no collateral, because the SMEs that are engaged in e-commerce would not have those brick and mortar physical assets to put up collateral. So that's one of the programs that's just come in. The Micropayments Gateway 2020, the core is to reach, to transform the reach, security, speed, and quality and trust in digital payments available to individuals and institutions in the country. There's another draft of digital bank regulatory framework that's been floated, which seeks to extend low-cost digital financial services and to further develop digital ecosystem in the country. You have SMEDA's National Policy Action Plan, which looks at securing SME quotas in public procurement, SME access to credit again, simplification of Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan procedures. FIE, of course, comes in when you have situations of cyber theft, you have data privacy issues. Of course, they act under the ETO 2002 and PICA 2016. You have other organizations like TDAB, which is developing a trade facilitation portal. You have the FBR engaged in legal frameworks, including commerce rules regarding mechanism of imports, goods clearance, return of goods policy, VBOC e-commerce module. NIF continues to develop a payment solution for cross-border international payments in collaboration with the State Bank. They're looking to bring in PayPal, Google Pay, and Apple Pay for residents living outside the country right now. Policy framework, which I think will be discussed in more detail as we move forward. E-commerce policy looks at raising e-commerce exports by 50% through the ESME initiative. ESME initiative also seeks to identify, train, and enable 50,000 ESMEs of the remote areas of Pakistan to online marketplaces. Also, under the e-commerce policy, you have the National E-commerce Council, which Aswan Saab will talk about, but the council deals as a single window for policy implementation and review to facilitate e-commerce players. You have both the private and public sector coming together over there. Then the Digital Pakistan policy talks about establishing a national e-commerce gateway with a state bank to support and coordinate relevant stakeholders to promote internet accounts to facilitate business to business and other inbound transactions. Also for MSMEs and disadvantaged groups, the policy seeks to enhance their effective participation in e-commerce activities. The National Cybersecurity Policy 2021 seeks to promote online businesses, enabling the smooth running of digital payments within and outside Pakistan. Other fundamental pillars of the e-commerce policy are of course complaints related to e-transactions, to determine the jurisdiction for solving such problems, to estimate losses caused to the consumer, to set up an online dispute resolution based on the Trade Dispute Resolution Act, and to define the what constitutes an online transaction between e-sellers and consumers. After this situation, the policy and the legislative framework that we have, we understand that the potential is huge. We do understand that MSMEs do face a lot of hindrances and bottlenecks while transforming to e-commerce platforms. So as we move forward, what we need to address is that through public-private dialogue, can we look towards setting up an e-commerce business facilitation hub? How do we collectively come together to empower youth, women entrepreneurs, and SMEs for e-commerce, and of course, access to resource as it remains a serious concern. And then, of course, the SMEs require skill development, and how can we coordinate to bring those programs into effect at the national, provincial, and district levels. I'll stop here, and Ahad, I hope I did not go over time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. So we'll just now move towards the panel discussion. I'll just like to point out some basics of how we will be conducting this discussion. So there will be a couple of rounds. For the first round, I like your interventions to be limited to 5 to 7 minutes. And then, of course, depending on the time that we have at the end, if someone will like, they can respond. There are some Q&A questions coming in the Q&A tab. All of you can access that. If you like to answer them directly, you can do so, or you can answer them in the interventions as well. Unfortunately, our colleagues from the State Bank of Pakistan were also supposed to join us today, but I think they have a meeting regarding the monetary policy today, so they regretted just a few moments before the meeting. And I'd like to introduce one more panelist to this August panel, that is Mr. Ahmed Qadir, who is the Director General, Competition Commission of Pakistan, and he has written extensively with regards to the e-commerce policy, and I think he has a very strong background and a very strong grip on the subject. So just to start off, we will be starting off with the private sector first. So I'll request Mr. Asfandyar Farooq for his initial remarks. Sir, I would request you to kindly keep it between 5 to 7 minutes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, and Assalamu alaikum. I would just like to, thank you for inviting me from the private sector side. I'd just like to start with sort of laying a bit of information out regarding the National E-Commerce Council. This is a spearhead within the National E-Commerce Policy. It was formed on the basis of that and is led by the Ministry of Commerce. And the e-commerce policy has 7 pillars. And the job of the National E-Commerce Council is to deliberate on the various pillars and to work on the action plan that was initially made, and to bring improvements within the action plan and ensure its implementation with a wide variety of public sector stakeholders and private sector stakeholders, which includes trade associations, e-commerce players such as online marketplaces, merchants, logistics players, and a lot of a variety of private sector stakeholders, and anybody is able to participate in the deliberations in the meetings. And I believe there have been 5 meetings so far, starting from January 2020 till now. And so what has been going on within the National E-Commerce Council is to ensure that all the action items pertaining to each pillar are taken forward. And I think a lot of the good part about it is that we have and I think this is very important moving forward, is to ensure that there's representation of SMEs, especially, and the issues that they face, and the way they are looking at growing and scaling e-commerce within Pakistan, domestically and internationally, when we talk about international trade and cross-border trade. And I think that is, I think, a very critical part of this. And I think that that's a challenge as well, that because we have a conventional sort of a system in Pakistan where a lot of the time, even I'm associated with the trade association, but the idea is that with individual businesses and SMEs, there should be a lot of engagement rather than the conventional way where we have associations and chambers involved and they have their own way of working. It's very important for direct contact to be established at every public stakeholder level. I think the Ministry of Commerce and the other stakeholders within the National E-Commerce Council, especially the State Bank of Pakistan, the SSCP, are very progressive in this regard. But I think it's important that because e-commerce is a very fast-moving sort of ecosystem globally in Pakistan, it's very important to learn from the private sector as to what the various business models are, what the challenges associated to them are. And I think that is a key area that needs to be worked on by all the public sector stakeholders. Along with that, I would say that the expertise within the public sector also, and the capacity building also needs to be enhanced, not just from feedback from the private sector, but I think this is an important aspect, because we do see in certain places and certain regulators and ministries where we have this challenge of understanding the various business models and how SMEs are sort of fit into that sort of space. Along with that, I just like to add one more important point, and then I'll leave it to the other panelists. I don't want to go into too much detail, but I think it's very important to look at e-commerce from the goods, the trade of goods and the trade of services. I think it's very apparent that as far as exports are concerned, ICT services have grown substantially and manifold compared to the export of goods. As I think currently there's over 50% growth in ICT services over the last 1 year plus. And as a proportion of overall export of goods and services, we've seen it go from 3 to 4 to 7% of overall exports. So I think that is where the real growth will come in. And that is actually interesting enough. We have a lot of exports of services happening under the radar. For example, we're talking about formal exports here, ICT export, but there are a lot of sort of services that individuals and freelancers are providing within the e-commerce space internationally. And those are recorded primarily as remittances. But so those are not even regulated or sort of documented in that form. And that's and we have a lot with our youth bulge, and we have a lot of youth that are actually already engaged in learning about and learning skills related to e-commerce and providing services abroad through various freelancing portals and even directly with e-commerce players globally. So as the goods are concerned, definitely, and as we know, and I think it's been touched upon as well, that e-commerce the trade of goods has a few more barriers to entry as far as financing is concerned, as far as regulation is concerned, and setting up sort of brick and mortar businesses. But as far as services, I think that is where we are already seeing a lot of growth coming in on the services side. And I think that is where the real growth will come in, and it's very easy for the youth, for women, for SMEs and micro entrepreneurs to take advantage of this. So I think that's also a very important sort of aspect that needs to be looked at. Thank you. I'll end there and be happy to add into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Asfandyar Saab. I'll now like to move to Dr. Ghulam Samit. Sir, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Thank you so much, ICT. Thank you so much, SDBI, for the invitation. Quickly, I will kick off my discussion with I think the fundamental issue the SMEs are facing is the financing. And I do believe that the fundamental, one of the key objectives should be that how e-commerce policy basically financing the SMEs. That would be the fundamental discussion point that I want to bring in for the discussion. And then, of course, based on the Carrick Institute studies, we had studies on the e-commerce infrastructure, where we thoroughly discussed the overall Carrick region infrastructure landscape, but particularly I will discuss the discussion related to Pakistan, and then the regulatory in one of the related discussion points here. And then before I end up, I will talk about the SMEs capacity issues, and then what would be the way forward. So if you look into the overall SMEs financing, it has been mostly 80 to 90% of the trade financing been come from the trade financing. If you look the overall picture of the trade financing for the MSMEs, it's been almost disproportionate in the we know the reason for the SMEs are disproportionate distribution of the trade finance. But the important point here is what are the key important factors that basically bring in this disproportion of the trade financing for the MSMEs. I think the fundamental first one is the availability of the alternative financing of firm operation in overall the Carrick region, but in particular in Pakistan. So if you look into the operation of the alternative financing in Pakistan, unfortunately, we have very limited alternative financing firm operation in Pakistan. If we compare with the Central Asian or the rest of the Carrick countries, definitely the Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and China has been dominating there. So the focus should be on the development of the home-based financing operation so that we can facilitate further the SMEs operation. The second fundamental issue that has been highlighted at the very beginning by Tawqir Saab is about how we can basically bring in financial development, at least at the level where we can start facilitating the SMEs financing. So if we can look into the overall indicator for the financial development, again, for Pakistan, it's been low in the trajectory. The third important point, I think, is the corresponding banking relationship, where we can see the SMEs kind of integration with the regional economies and of course with the global economies. So if you can see the corresponding banking relationship, unfortunately the oral CARIC region, but specifically in Pakistan, we are standing somewhere even below the average of the CARIC economies. Of course, I'm not discussing the People's Republic of China case here. So building on the corresponding banking relationship where basically we have been trading is most important for the SMEs smooth functioning. And lastly, I think that is required for the SMEs facilitation. Trade financing is about how basically we are regionally integrated with the economies. And if you can look into the different indicators for the SMEs, unfortunately, again, Pakistan is somewhere below in par with the regional integrations and specifically in the CARIC region. So these are the four fundamental reasons, I think, where we can build on how we can basically facilitate the trade financing for the MSMEs. The second important discussion point is about the e-commerce infrastructure, and it's been alluded at the beginning by one of our colleagues. So the internet infrastructure has been there, but the fundamental, I think, issues that SMEs need to focus more on, and I think the e-commerce policy need to build on, is the payment infrastructure for both the demand side and for the supply side. How basically we can facilitate the demand and supply side, the payment infrastructure, so that we can again facilitate the smooth transition for the digital kind of a transition for the SMEs, so that they can survive in the market. The second component related for the e-commerce infrastructure is about the logistics. And again, if we can look into the overall logistics, basically the service providers, the consolidators, the delivery operators, and reverse logistics. These kind of logistics again still need to build on, so that we can again facilitate the overall digital transition in this country, and of course specifically we can facilitate the SMEs financing as well. And lastly, if we can look into the e-commerce market, again, unfortunately, based on the internet infrastructure, based on the payment infrastructure, and based on the prevailing logistics in Pakistan, the overall e-commerce market so far has not been developed. If you look into the figures, I think the internet kind of access has been there, large population has been there, but unfortunately, if you look into the online transactions, it's been less than 5%. So it shows us kind of a level of engagement of the population in the online transaction. So as mentioned by Tawfiq, a lot of potential has been there. So then we can engage ourselves, so that we can basically bring in a more facilitation for the SMEs. And the third point is about the e-commerce regulation. And again, from the perspective of the CARIC oral studies, but related to Pakistan, I think if you look into the electronic transaction and the regulatory matters, particularly as privacy, cybercrime, and consumer protection kinds of issues, I think that has been discussed thoroughly in the policy. But the real challenge is that how we can basically implement, what would be the implementation mechanism for the SMEs. So these regulatory kind of establishing the landscape of the environment for the SMEs is again one of the biggest challenge I would say would be. So for now, I stop here. Looking forward, I have for further discussion if there's anything related to this discussion point. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Samad. We'll move on to Mr. Shahryar Tahir from Smeda. Sir, please.
Thank you, Atsab, for inviting Smeda to this webinar. We are very excited to be here in the sense that Smeda has been working for the e-commerce sector for a while now, but given the announcement of the e-commerce policy, I think we've made substantial efforts in order to implement some of the policy measures that have been highlighted by Ministry of Commerce. Primarily in terms of our role in the e-commerce policy relates to capacity building. However, given the fact that Smeda works on multi-faceted, multi-level approach for SMEs, Therefore, we've been working on the e-commerce where we've been dealing with the subject vis-a-vis micro exports as well as mainstream SME exports. So the way we look at e-commerce is split between micro exports and the mainstream exports. Now I saw a message that somebody mentioned that why is Amazon slow in coming to Pakistan? Now that relates to the micro exports that we are looking at, and which will be one of the major areas that SMETA will be working on. Secondly, in terms of mainstream exports through e-commerce, I think there is a need for more engagement in terms of capacity development, enhancement, product improvement, product selection, and using e-commerce as one of the main platforms for exports. Now, we recently carried out a survey, which was a regional survey with the help of Asian Development Bank Institute. And we found out that Pakistan was one of the early adopters for e-commerce within the region, while other countries in the region, which include Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh, Mongolia, were a little late. So in terms of where we are right now and where we want to go, I think it's very important that we realize the gaps which exist for the SMEs, and I hope we will be talking in detail about that. Now, within the ecosystem which exists for e-commerce, SMETA specifically works on capacity building and handholding. In the past year, we've held about 51 training programs all across Pakistan, given the fact that SMETA is a federal government organization, and we've facilitated about 2,500 SMEs and capacitated them to start using e-commerce as a tool for domestic as well exports. That is one area. Now, the other important area where we are focusing on is the business development services providers capacity building and network. There we are providing TOT programs because we think that in order for the government and the private sector to work together, I think there needs to be a platform. I think Mr. Aswandiyar also highlighted that apart from NECC, we need a more robust platform where the private sector and the public sector can interact with each other. We have initially ventured into a development of a consultant database for e-commerce. That is the first step. And subsequently, we are proposing, and we will be working on a more technology-oriented program where all the service providers in e-commerce space can be linked up with the SMEs. So the information asymmetry which exists right now needs to be handled through this. Other than that, I think in terms of the channels that we will be focusing on is, apart from the online marketplace, and the free lance marketplace, social media, company websites, mobile and email services. I think that's the areas that the SMEs will be using in future. So we will be working with the SMEs. We have handholding support measures also, which exist across our help desk in 21 locations all over Pakistan. So in order to tackle this, in a nutshell, the ecosystem, Mr. Ghulam had mentioned that, with the regulations, the logistics, but I think for all of these things to happen, there needs to be more coordination between government and the private sector. Now, the private sector in itself has been very actively pursuing the advancements in e-commerce. We see a lot of companies which are working on with Amazon, not with Amazon, but for SMEs onboarding on Amazon and other platforms. So I think the government, including SMETA, will be working so that these companies can expedite the number of SMEs to be using e-commerce in future. So this is for now, and I'll be more than happy to take any questions as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you, Shahriyar Saab. I'll now like to move to Ms. Aisha. Ma'am, if you can give your initial interventions, please.
Ji, thank you very much for organizing this seminar on a very important subject and providing me an opportunity to speak on this topic. As you know, many speakers have highlighted the fact that Pakistan's e-commerce policy is there, and in the region we see that not every country has come up with a policy. The benefit of policy is that it very clearly demonstrates the direction that government is taking. And if you look at the policy, one of the very important element is that it has a separate pillar which talks about empowerment of SMEs, youth, and women. As very rightly pointed out by Dr. Takir, that the main revolution of our time is ICT sector, which has actually made tremendous changes in terms of making labor free from the shackles. You know that in the global organizations and different forums, developing countries have been fighting for more access to labor in their markets, but ICT revolution has automatically opened up these opportunities, and now Pakistan is one of the leading countries contributing to freelancing. And you may be sitting in any corner of the world, but you can work for Silicon Valley. So this is the kind of revolution which has connected the world, not just for services, but for goods as well. So keeping in view this perspective of global changes, and then the importance of regional connectivity, Ministry of Commerce is very actively working on e-commerce policy implementation, and NECC is National E-Commerce Council, is the forum where we work very closely with the private sector. And all the regulation facilitation that has been achieved up till now, the success of that is that private sector was in the leading role here. We are not steering it alone. Government is not the only sector which is sitting on the steering. It's jointly shared, and I'm sure Asfandyar would second my opinion on this aspect, that we have been working very closely with them and trying our best that we find out the bottlenecks and remove them step by step. So some of the leading achievements that we have done in terms of facilitating e-commerce is creation of B2C cross-border mechanism. In Pakistan, there was no mechanism for exporting, e-commerce products. Even for services also, the system was not that streamlined. The payment coming for the freelancer work was being reflected in the remittances. So those side, data improvements have also come in place. The enhancement for the freelancer remittance from 5,000 to 25,000 has also improved the services side. And on the goods side, an absolutely new mechanism has been created where if an SME wants to export a packet of up to $5,000, there is no requirement for e-firm. And you can just give your product to the courier, and there is no need to file GD. So those sort of facilitative approaches and introduction of new mechanisms has definitely contributed not just to documentation of economy, but increase in exports as well. Now, training and skill development is a very important part of the policy, and with active collaboration with the international development partners, we are working with the She Means Business initiative of ITC. I2I and Facebook are implementing that, and the Ministry of Commerce is collaborating with that initiative. So it's a e-commerce accelerator program, which is providing very comprehensive training. So that's one area where women empowerment is also very important for the government, and we are very closely working with the key partners. Similarly, for youth empowerment, Kamyab Jawan is an initiative of the government, which has engaged youth through youth councils, and access to finance is a very important part of that program. So we had youth conference in August in collaboration with Kamyab Jawan. And now we are in the process of implementing those recommendations. Similarly, we had a very specific event for women empowerment, and we have created a women economic empowerment group, and women who are on that group are constantly collaborating and providing input through the NECC. So for the first time, there is a process in place in the Ministry of Commerce. We are actively engaging not just with SMEs, because SMEDA is there, and SME voice is quite clear. But I think women and youth were still underrepresented in the government policy voice. So through the NECC, we have created specific working groups, and their recommendations are coming to a national policy process, and we are effectively implementing the suggestions which are coming through that forum. Although State Bank is not here in today's meeting, but very effective changes have happened through the e-commerce policy and active collaboration of State Bank. For example, in investment policy, they have made changes, and for the whitelisting of companies and to promote digital marketing, they have made a lot of changes. Remittance abroad was sending money to various digital companies was not an easy process. So up till 200,000 was allowed, and now the limit has increased to 400,000. And companies which are not included in the whitelisting, the limit was $20,000, and that has enhanced to $40,000. So these are small steps, but if you talk to the businesses, these were the practical impediments which were hindering their growth processes. So step by step, we are trying to remove those bottlenecks which are practically hampering the growth of SMEs, women entrepreneurs, and youth. Consumer protection has been highlighted as a very important part, and there are almost all provinces have their Consumer Protection Act, and we are very closely working with the provincial governments. Some of the provincial governments have to make changes in their act, but Punjab is ahead of rest of the provinces in terms of working on their Consumer Protection Act and incorporating e-commerce complaints as well. They regularly report NECC that how many e-commerce related complaints were received in their Consumer Protection Councils, how many have been addressed, what is the number of complaints which are still pending. So that is the kind of data which we are encouraging all the provinces to provide to NECC. It may take some time, but the organization systems are being put in place to look at all these aspects and provide an opportunity to all NECC members, which includes private sector, to get a full spectrum that how 9 pillars are being implemented. In the upcoming NECC, which is planned on 30th of September, we will be giving a full graphical picture that how much each pillar has been implemented. So there is an effort on the part of the Ministry of Commerce to work with all the organizations and with the private sector to not just implement the process, but let the country know that the policy is being implemented. The Competition Commission is also a very important part of the NECC. We regularly receive reports from them. In terms of setting, seeing that competition is available and price setting is not distorting the market, they are playing a very important role. And the beauty of NECC is that all the regulators are sitting there. So e-commerce is not something that we can say that let the State Bank regulate it, or let Competition Commission regulate it, or let the provinces regulate it because Consumer Protection Act is there. We need each and every regulator sitting in NECC and coordinating their efforts. The main reason why our policies fail to implement, because we do not coordinate our regulators and implementers effectively. So the role of Ministry of Commerce here is to make sure that all the regulators are sitting, they work in a coordinated manner, and the private sector and public sector are steering the process of implementation in an harmonious way and working in hand.
Aisha, can I intervene? Please, your time is up, but we will get back to you at the end. Thank you. So I'll now like to move to Mr. Ahmed Kadir. Sir, your interventions, please.
Assalamualaikum, Ahad. Can you, is my voice coming through?
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
I'd just like to share a few slides. I think that will help me focus my discussion. So, all right. So this was a presentation that is a little old. It's October 2019, but this was soon after the national e-commerce policy was finalized or approved by the cabinet. And I think one of the things which Madam Aisha Muriani just mentioned, that the role of every regulator. So, up and down the supply chain of effective regulation for e-commerce, I think that's a very important role. So the key stakeholders that we felt are important are the e-commerce enterprises themselves, other institutions, revenue authorities, and financial institutions that intermediate the payment mechanisms. Regulatory bodies such as the Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan and the State Bank of Pakistan, and perhaps even new ones like the Trade Dispute Resolution Organization are very important. And ultimately, the consumers have to take full advantage of any e-commerce initiatives that are there in Pakistan. So from the regulatory aspect, ease of doing business, even though that's probably a controversial phrase to use these days, but still, in terms of streamlining certain processes, a lot of work has been done, and I think Mr. Asfandiar Farooq and all those people who have participated in the National E-Commerce Council meetings that have held, they've sort of highlighted these issues and defined them very well, as has the Ministry of Commerce. I'm very happy to see that in terms of consumer protection, although our legal framework is provincial based and goes back maybe 10, 15 years, I'm happy to see that there's some modicum of updating Pakistan's consumer protection framework. In terms of the national e-commerce policy document itself, it was a little vague on the competition dynamics. So I think there are certain, because this is a marketplace and economic activities happen. So e-commerce activities are subject to those same possible violations that happen in regular marketplaces. So there could be abuse of dominance by those holding significant market power, or there could be prohibited agreements, also we call them cartels, between e-commerce actors that allocate markets or set prices. The document is a little generic on consumer protection, but again, that being that's not to sort of find faults with the document, but because of the provincial nature of our consumer protection, that was to be expected. The role of the Competition Commission is a bit broad. It comes more perhaps towards the end when e-commerce is already up and operational. So one of the documents soon after what we did was soon after the policy framework was approved by Cabinet, we sent an addendum document to the Commerce Ministry explaining how certain e-commerce activities could violate the competition law and what are the consumer protection aspects that need to be perhaps defined a little more clearly, and the importance, and I think I keep coming back to this in every session that we've had, the legal framework for data protection. Now that is, I believe that is pillar number 8 in the e-commerce policy framework, but I think we are a little lagging behind. So there are some general competition concerns. Yes, it will increase competition in the markets because you tend to expand beyond your geographical scope. That's good, but the thing is that can competition law, because it's designed with physical markets, can it deal with online activities that happen online? And what kind of sensitive information can be exchanged between companies or actors that should be competing, but then it's not obvious how they share information? And can e-commerce systems be used to exclude individual companies from the marketplace? And can a concentration of buyer or seller power, alter competition dynamics? Just a quick example, the abuse of dominance is generally of 2 types, exploitative and exclusionary. So pricing restrictions, price discrimination, for example, pricing the same product differently in Karachi vis-a-vis Lahore, vis-a-vis Peshawar, Islamabad, then there could be distortions that happen that affect consumers. There could be cases of tying and bundling, where consumers are forced to purchase a second or third product conditional on purchasing the first one. In terms of exclusionary abuse, there could be refusal to deal, for example, providing access to online marketplaces or not having information available on price comparison websites, or even sharing consumer data. I think one of the big things, as we move to an app-based economy accelerated by COVID-19, a lot of certain companies have acquired a lot of data. For example, in Pakistan, Food Panda has a considerable treasure trove of data on consumer preferences and buying habits, but will they share that data? And how will they safeguard the data? And if a new entrant comes in, will they willingly share that data? What kind of distribution agreements that could be in place that could alter competition dynamics? Prohibited agreements. One of the issues of having transparency in sort of digital comparison tools is that it can automatically help in setting prices. Now, transparency is generally a good thing, but in certain cases, perhaps too much transparency leads to unintended consequences and outcomes. So one has to sort of weigh and offset the benefits of price comparison websites with perhaps their impact on setting prices. Geo blocking has been something that has been highlighted by the European Union in terms of allocating markets. So, for example, certain products may not be available to consumers who are logging on to common e-commerce websites from Italy, as let's say compared to Spain or France. So that could possibly become an issue in Pakistan also when it comes to provincial availability of goods and services. The OECD's e-commerce recommendation and UNCTAD consumer protection guidelines, they were issued in 2016, and we feel and we recommended also that our national e-commerce policy framework should at least adhere to these global standards, because when it comes to Pakistan's rating and ranking in the e-commerce statistics, at least there's an apple-to-apple comparison. And we've sort of identified 3 stages where consumer protection guidelines need to be looked at very carefully: before a purchase takes place, the purchase itself, and then post-purchase in terms of after-sales service and support that you get. Consumer data, acquisitions and mergers, we've noticed globally, consumer data is one of the key drivers of acquisitions and mergers, and it's similar to research and development information or patents. And Pakistan has been no exception to this trend. In the recent past, we've noticed the merger or the acquisition of Daraz, one of our premier e-commerce actors, by Alibaba, based in China. And the Careem and Uber merger was also largely fueled and instigated by Careem's access to consumer data of Pakistan. Now we're talking about data, and I think e-commerce is really underpinned by all the data that buyers and sellers have available. So, and this includes not just the buying history and the quantum of purchases, but it includes sensitive financial data. For example, payment account details, credit card numbers, etc. So personal data is valuable for online businesses. It helps in generating market intelligence and helps consumer profiling. But I think for that to be done, that to really be done carefully, we do need a data privacy and data protection law in Pakistan. And I think
kindly wind up in 2 minutes, please.
All right. So challenges here include, the lack of knowledge of how data is collected by e-commerce actors and how it's protected, and what happens in case there's a breach of data protection. So Pakistan's data protection bill is still in the development stage, and because we don't have a data protection framework, it may make it difficult for international platforms to operate locally and protect our citizens from e-commerce fraud. And this could be an entry barrier because companies may hesitate to operate in a weak regulatory regime. And insecurity about one's personal data can really stifle competition and innovation. I think Dr. Waqar Ahmed and myself, we wrote an article that was published in late 2019 in a regional publication, and this talks about e-commerce regulations. And I will request STPI to share this article with whoever is interested. And I think coming to the neighborhood, we find that some of the problems that we have highlighted have found resonance in India also. So they talk about algorithms and how price setting algorithms can determine prices, or e-commerce platforms can give preferential treatment to certain sellers and sort of abuse their dominance and exclude certain other sellers. I think discounts, commission, and algorithm issues have been identified in India, and I think these are issues that we will also have to look at, given that the software and the platforms are relatively similar globally. And I think some of the things that India has promulgated in terms of competition regulations, no discounts, and I think the key point is storing consumer data within India, and not having having tax incentives for data localization and creating infrastructure for data centers in India. And this is something that perhaps Pakistan may also need to consider. I'll stop here. I think that was the extent of my presentation. And I hope this sort of explains briefly the role of the Competition Commission of Pakistan. So thank you, Ahad Saab, for giving me this time.
Thank you, Qadir Saab. I'll now move on to Dr. Waqar Ahmed, who is the Joint Executive Director of STPI.
Thank you, Ahad. Thank you, Ahmed Saab, for really setting the stage and also introducing the joint research that we conducted with the CCP. I think I'll just limit myself to 3 main points because a lot has already been said. One is really our own motivation to what we would like to get out of a discussion or a series of discussion like this. So as we see it, there's a lot happening, and the government has really done very well, as pointed out by Ms. Aisha Moriani as well as Dr. Tawqir Shah. And I think what we can do is to support as best as possible and sort of also reduce duplicity of work here. So at one level, we need to see that going forward in terms of expediting the action plan, what is it that government, regulators, and private sector has to do? And a clarity on this is already there at the federal level, but at a provincial level, lines are a bit blurred. But that doesn't mean that things are not moving forward. Second, the role for knowledge intermediaries like ourselves, like STPI, but also knowledge intermediaries on the private sector side, such as the Pakistan Business Council, for example. And I think these knowledge intermediaries really have an evolving role over here, given the COVID situation and the fact that the demand for e-commerce or online businesses have increased amid COVID. And then I think at a third level, one needs to see the role of development partners here, including the ITC, and what are those specific knowledge deficits which these development partners can really fill up for us. So these are the three levels of way forward, if I can call this. As for us, I think our large focus would remain in three main areas, and I talk of STPI and the research team over here. And I think the spirit of collaborating with ITC was also, of course, the same, that the fact that at a first year, our main focus is to really create an advocacy and make a push for enabling infrastructure for e-commerce, particularly in areas where it is missing. You have large infrastructure deficits in second-tier cities and below. There are almost whole of provinces in Pakistan that may not be able to gain from the e-commerce dividend unless that enabling infrastructure for e-commerce isn't in place. That's one. Second, we are most interested in being partners in providing solutions for a more conducive tax regime for e-commerce players. We had a separate consultation on this. We are working quite closely with the federal, but more so with the provincial revenue authorities, where at a federal level, the tax regime faced by e-commerce enterprises, particularly those who are startup e-commerce enterprises, the tax regime faced by them is very fragmented and changes very frequently, something which we don't see in peer economies. And this really the uncertainty of a fast changing tax regime really spoils the balance sheets for our younger and startup enterprises. And then finally, I think something which Mr. Ahmed Kader has already alluded to is the consumer experience. I think we split our work on consumer experience at two levels. One is the trust and confidence of the consumer on the e-commerce policy and practice in Pakistan. And of course, when I say trust and confidence, I also mean the cyber security and other security, online security related measures, the sort of experience which consumers have with the cybersecurity units, may they be at a devolved level or at a macro level at FIA, for example. That's one. And then the second is the customer feedback. So most of the surveys that you will see, a lot more needs to be done to really bridge the experiential gaps that one is seeing when it comes to customer feedback and the learning from customer feedback, and then closing the loop, whether that learning really informs the firm experience and the firm improves itself. That closing of loop is still missing, something which we need to do. For example, consumers have been informing in most surveys that registering and following up a complaint of a smaller value order entails very high transactions cost, and it sometimes makes no sense for them even to follow the complaints. So it is issues like this under consumer experience that one would be really keen in discovering and working towards with all the ecosystem players who are available over here. Thank you, Ahad.
Thank you, sir. I'll just go back to the panel for 1 minute each intervention, and then we'll go back to Ms. Aisha Humaira Moriani for the closing remarks. So I'll start off with Dastan Yar Saab, please.
Ji, thank you. I think a lot of interesting and valid points have been raised by the esteemed panelists. I would like to take this opportunity to touch upon what Dr. Waqar was talking about, which is the tax regime. I think that is one big challenge that we see at the federal level and to some extent at the provincial level, because when we're talking provincial level, there is an initiative to harmonize taxation on services and all the aspects which come into the provincial domain. At the same time, at the federal level, I think we have seen, and I think it's a challenge that everybody faces, but we need to collectively work on it. And it's also been identified at the NACC level, to work on this along with the Federal Board of Revenue. I think is that, as was mentioned, there are a lot of ad hoc changes that come into play at the time of the when the money bill is presented to the Parliament. For example, just to give a small example, I mean, we had we had a measure that was introduced prior to the last finance bill in June and July, where certain business models, for example, an online marketplace was considered a retailer, and certain tax measures were being imposed without due consultation and understanding of the business model. So I think there are, as I had mentioned in the beginning, that it's very important for a deep understanding of the e-commerce ecosystem prior to any policy changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay sir. May I request Dr. Ghulam Samit?
Thank you, Ahad. I think the main points that so far have been discussed is that how we can facilitate the SME's smooth functioning. And again, I will reconnect that the fundamental issue that I can see is that the regional integration of the SMEs and how we can basically enhance the regional integration of the SMEs. And I think the one important issue so far I can see is that the corresponding banking relationship, even if we can see in the South Asian region, we can clearly see where we are spending for the corresponding banking relationship. If we can talk about the enhancement of the SMEs trade kind of thing. And of course, if you can look into the Central Asian, the CARIC perspective, again, the corresponding banking relationship is again not been developed so far. Along with that, I will again financial development kind of integration issues that has been very important for the SMEs smooth functioning. Again, unfortunately, we've been not there in part with the rest of the economies. Lastly, Ahad, I think been discussed by the esteemed panelists, but the e-commerce infrastructure and then the regulatory environment, we need to be a focus where we can clearly see where Pakistan has been standing, and if we can see the cross comparison, again, we can clearly see the pictures, and we can clearly highlight the targeted intervention for the regulation, I think, been discussed very clearly by the esteemed panelists. And lastly, I think the role of the relevant agencies has been very important for the smooth functioning of the SMEs. The payment-related implications and complexities, both from the demand side and from the supply side, has been there. And I think we need to see that which agencies basically has been responsible. And CCP has been mentioned that just in case, where would be the SMEs, just in case it has been there to cause the competition or the consumer protection violation, so then we can import the CCP in there. So these are all I have so far from my side. The role of the focus relevant agency has been important. I think very targeted kind of intervention needs to be highlighted there. The SME's capacity enhancement is one of the fundamental, I do believe it's an issue, and we need to work on the SME's capacities enhancement so that they can basically handle the e-commerce related transactions, and then the facilitation of the financing for the SMEs through the different indicators that I already alluded towards. So I'll stop there, and thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Taqir Shah would like to speak, sir.
Maybe on mute.
Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Now you are, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Asab. I'll just take a minute to address the issue which one of the participants raised, which is the fourth industrial revolution, or people call IR 4.0. You see, in my view, essentially, industrial revolution IR is about automation of manufacturing, which is about automation joined with artificial intelligence. It's about data. It's about transparency and information. And essentially, it is about decision-making, which is very empirical and data-based. So the participant raised the issue, what are the challenges? The key issue is that the policymakers, if they want to gear the country and economy for IR 4.0, then the decision making has to be very empirical, evidence driven, informed by data and not by whimsical thinking. So this would need a huge cultural change, a cultural change in the private sector, a cultural change in the public sector, and at the highest levels of the government, be it highest policy level or practice. So, and few issues which are big challenges for IR 4.0 are political, as I mentioned, the economic, huge investments are needed, huge finance is needed, which the banks or the financial sector has to provide to the companies who are prepared for this, and institutional. In the organization, there is very little top level ownership. We don't still have the skills and the knowledge base, which is really needed to be a key player in the fourth industrial revolution. And finally, Ahmed Qadir Saab mentioned regulation. You see, in my view, there are few primary drivers for IR 4.0, and one of the main one is cloud technology and data. We a very soft touch regulation as far as these two sectors are concerned, because be it e-commerce or be it fourth industrial revolution, the real driver is the cloud technology. And the cloud policy as it is being conceived and which was shared by the concerned ministries some time ago is going to scare away the global cloud service providers. So we, in a way, by that policy, are bringing in regulation which is too stringent, and which, in a way, we are shutting our doors to the global development in cloud technology that is there, because that practically shuts the door to the global cloud service providers. Similarly, data protection, the movement of data, server location, these are very critical issues which has to be thought through and which has to be looked on the principles of pure business and digital economy and not some misplaced nationalism. So far, what you've seen is that we are setting the bar so high in terms of data protection and cloud technology that maybe the global players may not find the turf really friendly for them to play. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. May I request Shahryar Saab for his final comments?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think a lot of pertinent points have been highlighted. We were talking about the ecosystem, we were talking about regulations, we were talking about 4.0, but at the end of the day, we have to see that how many SMEs actually take benefit of this opportunity. And for that to happen, I think there needs to be a facilitative role for the government. That can be done through direct services that SMEDA is providing and will continue to provide. But one very important thing is the role of private sector. We need to fulfill that information asymmetry. Because we work directly with the SME, so we've had some cases of exploitation by the private service providers when they're working with SMEs. So I think regulations and handholding, facilitation, the ecosystem needs all aspects. Finally, one important thing is the platforms that are required where the government and private sector and the SMEs can interact with each other, the points where they interact. I think NECC is a good step, but we need other platforms, direct platforms, points where this interaction can be more extensive and more meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you, Shahryar Saab. So I'll now request Ms. Aisha to give the concluding remarks, and then we'll close the discussion. Thank you.
Jay, thank you very much for giving me an opportunity opportunity, useful session, and very useful suggestions have come forward. Speakers that IT infrastructure and some of the policies that really provide the backbone and ecosystem of e-commerce, such as cloud policy or a data protection policy, which are still being worked at, have to be expedited, and we are coordinating with the Ministry of IT. I think one of the important roles that Dr. Waqar also mentioned, that there shouldn't be any duplication, but we should all be chipping in our contribution to ensure that the ecosystem works properly. An organization like SDPI can provide international best practices, for example, to MOIT policy, which is the latest version of 25th August. We are receiving some of the concerns of international players on that. So SDPI can come up with a paper and as a major think tank can play its role in terms of giving an international perspective that what sort of personal data protection will help Pakistani businesses to grow in terms of, not just the e-commerce, but the whole fourth industrial revolution provides a lot of global opportunities, and cloud policy and data protection policy are the real two policies which will ensure whether global players are interested in Pakistan or ready to integrate our SMEs or not. So I think these are two making or breaking policies for the ecosystem. And if SDPI would like to contribute as a think tank, their input on these two policies would be very helpful. And on the consumer protection side, I think, we need to work together, sit with the provinces, but we must the cultural change and the shift in mindset. We know that even if we go to a retail shop, our sales pitch it doesn't go beyond, if a consumer keeps asking for things. I mean, this is a practical experience that the shopkeeper says, "Ji, aap kuch lena bhi hai ya sirf dekhna hi hai?" So that is the standard of our services. So the services culture has to be created in Pakistan. Unless and until the businesses understand that consumer is the king, we won't be able to ensure consumer trust on e-commerce. On Amazon, without asking the question, for 1 month, consumer can return any product. So that is the kind of service culture which we have to brought in here. And for that, public and private sector have to play their role. And collectively, all of us can contribute for Pakistan's growth by, sitting together like this and looking at the challenges and working collectively for a common goal. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I'd like to thank the International Trade Center, SDPI management, and the honorable panelists for joining us. And of course, the attendees who have been very active on the Q&A tab as well. This is, of course, the first meeting in this series of trade policy meetings that we will be conducting. The next one is planned on 23rd September. That will be focused on export competitiveness amid COVID-19. Looking forward to hosting you again. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Thank you, and Allah Hafiz.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ji, thank you. Thank you very much.